Okay, 400.12, uses not permitted. Okay, let's take a look at this 400.12. Unless specifically permitted in 400, flexible cables, flexible cord sets, and power supply cords shall not be used in the following. What I find is interesting in 400.12 and the 17 code is that there are no longer any rules that apply to flexible cords. Because if we go to the code book, UL 87 applies to cord sets, which is extension cords, and power supply cords. UL 62 applies to flexible cords and cables. But the 2017 made a mistake and they removed the word flexible cords. So if we read this rule right now, none of this applies to flexible cords because they specifically removed out. So can flexible cords be used as a substitute fixed wiring? The answer is yes. Can it be run through holes in walls, structural members, ceiling members, suspended ceilings, drop ceilings, on floors? Yes. Can you run it through doorways, windows, a similar opening? Yes. Can you attach it to the building surface? Yes. Why? Because there is no rule in the 17 code that prohibits any limitation on a flexible cord. They only permit it to a flexible cable, which is like an elevator cable, a flexible cord set, which is an extension cord, and they have restrictions to power supply cords. So now you're thinking, why would they do that? Why would they specifically remove out flexible cords from the application? Let me give you a little story. 3 years ago, about now, I get a call from an air conditioning contractor. Say, hey, Mike, I got an inspector tells me I can't run my condensation pump motor and plug into a receptacle up there. I'm like, nope, can't do that. He goes, that's stupid. Why can't I just plug the thing into a receptacle up there? I said, listen, buddy, it's code. Just can't do it. So I'm driving, and it's always bothered me that you couldn't run a cord above a suspended ceiling like for a projector or for a condensation pump motor. So I go on the internet, I search for a flexible cord, and what I find is I find a picture, looking at images, I find a picture that has this example here of a power supply cord. This right here. And I'm like, okay. And then I look at that, and I then had the specifications, and it says power supply cord, and it says UL, let's go back over here, power supply cord, UL 817. And I'm thinking, well, what's a flexible cord? So then I search on the internet again, and I look for it, and I see that SJO cord like that reel, and I see a picture of that, and I click on that, go to Amazon, go to specifications, and look at the graphic, and it says it is a flexible cord and cable, UL 62. And I'm thinking, wait a minute now, the title of Article 400 was flexible cords and cables. And I'm like, holy mackerel. All this time, everybody on the planet thought that a power supply cord was a flexible cord, but it wasn't because UL 817 is power supply cords. A totally different standard is flexible cords, which is 62, which matches the title of Article 400. I'm like, oh my goodness, who would have thought about that? Call the guy back, say, look, I was wrong. You can run a power supply cord above and through a ceiling, a suspended ceiling. You just can't run a flexible cord. So I forgot what's going on. So I do a 2014 code changes, and I make a statement that, listen, that rule only applies to flexible cords, not power supply cords, and not extension cords. So now it goes on the internet, people start talking, and inspectors, I'm sure that creates some kind of energy, and the code panel members hear about that. I go to Philadelphia doing a code change seminar for ECNM Magazine. John Camgemi, good friend of mine, sweet guy with UL, comes up to me, taps my shoulder, hey, Mike, listen, I need to talk to you before we get going in the class tonight. I'm like, okay, listen, I heard you talking about that you can use a power supply cord above a suspended ceiling. And we just want you to know that, see, power supply cords 817, if you look at the construction specifications, 817 power supply cords and cord sets says that you are permitted to use flexible cords. I'm like, okay, so, but it's a power supply cord. Yeah, but Mike, because you're using a flexible cord in the construction of a power supply cord, UL considers that's a flexible cord. I said, John, a flexible cord is UL 62, power supply cord. Yeah, I know, no, Mike. But see, but because we're losing a flexible cord and a power supply cord, we consider that a flexible cord. And I'm on the code panel that addresses this thing, and it says that our position is you can't use a power supply cord. He says, so I just want to give it a heads up so that, I want any misunderstanding. I'm like, John, thanks so much. I said, that's the first thing I'm talking about, is that you can run a power supply cord above a suspended ceiling. You can run it through the ceiling. It's a total bunch of BS that you guys tell me I can't. What I can't do is a flexible cord. So I get up now, 400 people. I'm doing this whole and everything like that. And I said, okay, John, now you give your position. And John's the sweetest guy in the world. He gets up, he says, well, thank Michael for this opportunity. He says, now I represent underwrite. Everybody knows John. With UL and 62 and 817, it's constructed this and that, and I'm on the code panel, our position that, and I go like this, and I say, you know what? I don't care. I buy a flat screen TV, and it comes with a power supply cord. Don't tell me how I can use my appliance and what I plug it in. You can tell me the wire method to the box. You can tell me the construction of the box. You can tell me the wire connectors you use. You can tell me the wire size you use. You can tell me the overcurrent protection. You can talk about the device. You can talk about equipment grounding conductors. You can talk about the plate. But I do not believe the code 90.1, the scope of the NEC, applies at all to what I plug in. So then we leave it there. 2017 code process goes through, and you can see that they want to get Mike Holt. All the flurry. So now I told them this, listen, if it applies to power supply cords, what do you have to do? Change the scope and change the title of Article 400. It would say what? Flexible cords, flexible cables, power supply cords, and cord sets, right? Change the scope. Then go into the title, then go into the scope and say it. Hey, what is the scope, by the way, anyhow? What does it say? A flexible construction of flexible cords and flexible cables, not power supply cords and cord sets. So now they write a rule and they change the number of the rule just for purposes, and they go over to 400 dot, I think, is it 12 on use is not permitted? Yeah. Hey, don't tell anybody on this panel. Hey, what panel is this anyhow? I need to know the panel number on this here. Okay. So now they write 400.12 and they make a mistake. In the excitement and the flurry of trying to get power supply cords and flexible cords, they inadvertently, what panel is this?
6.
Don't tell the panel 6 guys about this video. But Brian, make sure this video goes on the website, okay?
I will do that.
Okay, thank you. In the excitement of trying to make sure they include the scope somehow, and the use is not permitted, okay? There's no uses permitted for power supply cords. So watch this. Look at uses permitted in 10. What's permitted uses? Flexible cords and flexible cables. You can't even use a power supply cord. But yet, here you are, the title doesn't cover it, the scope doesn't cover it, the use is permitted doesn't cover it, but they wanted to stop me from saying that you can't use it. So now, I see this, so I submit a public input. Hey guys, you need to add the word flexible cords to 400.12 because you made a mistake, and you should remove flexible cord sets and power supply cords. They saw Mike Holt, they saw public input, they immediately rejected it. Instead of reading it and seeing where I said, add flexible cords back. So now 400.12 does not have flexible cords, so there's no prohibition. So let's talk about a projector on the bottom of it. Can you run a power supply cord for a projector through the ceiling, in the ceiling to a receptacle? Look at this rule here. Can you run a power supply cord from a projector below the ceiling, through the ceiling, and in the ceiling?
No.
Nope.
Nope. Not
But guess what I would then do? I'd go get myself a cord connector, an attachment plug. I'd get myself a flexible cord. I make up my thing, and then I plug it in there, and I run the flexible cord through the ceiling and above the ceiling, and we're good. That's what it says. So 2020, listen. Come on, Panel 6 guys. Somebody contact these guys at Panel 6 and say, listen, think about this, guys. You can run power supply cords, refrigerators, dishwashers, disposals, all these industrial applications. Isn't the cord supposed to be suitable for the environment? Right? Industrial places, you have cords all over the place, but yet a cord above a suspended ceiling that's never going to get damaged. Can't be used. So why did we have this in the first place? Here's the deal in the first place. Ready for this? This started maybe 35, 40 years ago when I first got in the trade. People running flexible cords for the lights that they had on the front of these bars that would say Heineken or Budweiser. They ran it up and they went through the cord and they went through the ceiling, and somebody at that time did not like that application. So they changed the rule at that time not to allow a flexible cord. We all got sucked in thinking that was a flexible cord. So that's where it originated from. But now we're back to the point that we're just a mess. So panel 6, please. Article 400 doesn't apply to power supply cords. It doesn't apply to extension cords. It applies to flexible cords. Or get the co-panel 1 to change the scope of Article 400. Come on, give me a break. Okay, so now let's talk about the uses and the uses not permitted. You ready for this? Okay, uses not permitted. Well, we just talked about that. It doesn't apply to flexible cords, but it does to power supply cords and cord set. So now, you cannot use a flexible cord for any kind of wiring, which makes sense. Can't use flexible. I'm sorry, this is a cord set, right? It's a cord set. Cord sets are, that's UL 817. Now, this flexible cords, okay, now you can run a flexible cord. That'd be fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just can't run a power supply cord. So in other words, as long as this flexible cord, in other words, you could not take this power supply cord and bring it up here, because then you're running a power supply cord through it. Now, of course, you cannot ever vacuum. You got to be careful when somebody's vacuuming their house, because power supply cords cannot be run through doorways, windows, or similar openings. Because if you're saying that the code applies to how you use an appliance, and it's a power supply cord, and the rule says it can't go through doorways, oh, that's a violation. And it concealed in floors, okay. You cannot, here's an example where you could not do, because it's a power supply cord, cannot be above a suspended ceiling.
I see more than one violation there.
What's wrong?
Well,
I don't see any violations, but tell me what violation you see. First of all, it is a violation now that they're saying power supply cords can't be. It was not a violation 17. So what I would do is I would just cut all these things off and run cords and put connectors on all ends of them, and then make my own run flexible cord, which is crazy. Guys, can you see a hazard? You're going to electrocute somebody. I mean, you can run the cords on the ground, but you can't above the ceiling. So that is a violation now.
Go back to 23, slide 23, the one with what looks like a compressor. What is it?
Yeah, that's a little pressure washer.
Oh,
But the problem is I ran it through the door.
well,
I really do is take a picture inside my house with a vacuum cleaner.
except how would you ever find that? Who would find that? It's a temporary installation. You would never
Inspectors
see
drive around all the time looking for stuff like this. Or maybe not. In other words, clearly the code is not intended on how you use a product, right? How you use a product. The code is worried about the installation of electrical equipment.
Exactly.
Not the use of equipment. My position is this is not even within the scope of the code.
Right.
At all. 90.1 talks about the installation of electrical products. If I want to take a hair dryer, or I want to hang a tree outside with a bunch of hair dryers and take an extension cord out there that says dry location only, that's not part of the code.
But this is not an installation.
This is a fire marshal issue. It's a fire marshal issue. All right, we'll move on. But that's what the code says. 2020, maybe we'll get some sanity there. Brian?
Well, while we're talking about what things are and what things aren't, when we're talking about cords and cord sets, I remember, and Eric, maybe it was 2011, I can't remember for sure, we're at dinner one night, and Eric and Ryan Jackson, it probably took them 10 minutes to convince me that tray cable was not a flexible cable. And I was like, no, but it is. It's flexible. It's a cable. It really is. Going back to what you were just talking about, again, tribal knowledge, right? It's just, we look at things and we assume because we think we know what something is that rules apply to things. And they did eventually. They're like, look in 400, there's no tray cable in 400. That's got its own section in the code book. And eventually, I'm like, but it's got black insulation
You
and
have
it's
experience.
flexible.
You carry things historically, and people, I don't think you can come up with the reason why they could be a hazard above a suspended ceiling any more than it'd be down on the ground. But it's what it says, or at least that's what we thought it said.
Other than maybe it's being used as a plenum.
Now that, okay. So maybe we need to have some requirements, but then again, you can't even do that because that's a usage. If somebody wants to plug something in a plenum space, right? Now, I think 300.3c should have informational notes that the use of power supply cords, right, because you should not allow flexible cords, clearly. But power supply cords should be permitted. But we need to have an informational note. Let's add an informational note that power supply cords should be considered because of the plenum use space.